Hello everyone. I'm making a follow-up video because I said I would if I get enough likes and comments and shares, and I have got that. So I thank you guys for the 2,900 and something people that watched my video about these books. I got the second one. I'm going to get the whole book real soon because on September 11th, the encoder who wrote it, who encoded it, Thomas E. Harriet. Oh, you can't see it there. This guy. Spelled Uharriet. I'm friends with him on Facebook and I've been talking to him, so he's going to do a special because I told him if you buy the book Billy's Back, it's not worth buying the second book, which is Beatles Enlightenment, which are both excerpts from the longer book, which is the memoirs of Billy Shears. So I would recommend, if you can afford the larger book, just get the larger book, because I wanted to get the smaller book because I wanted to see if it's worth even reading. And I really liked it so much getting the smaller book that I thought I would get the other smaller book. But I didn't know the thing is, when you buy these books online, they don't say how many pages are in the book, because they are there's no page numbers, because they're excerpts from the larger book, which I don't know how many pages that is. So if you're just going to buy one of them and you don't want to buy all the biggest one, I would recommend Billy's Back, because I would say that's about 250 pages from the books that I've written that are similar size. This one was about $18 paperback. The Beatles Enlightenment book is about less than half that size, but is almost the same price. I think it was like $16. But the problem is if you bought this one and then you buy this one, there's a few chapters that are from this one that are in this one. So the new material is so few chapters that it's not worth almost the same price. And I would imagine, looking at it, it's about 75 pages compared to almost the same price book, which is about 200 pages or so. So it might be 100 pages, okay? But anyway, actual new material is probably about 70 pages. So I wouldn't waste the money on the Beatles and Enlightenment. Of course, the new chapters that are in here that are not in this book are very interesting. And maybe I'll just go through some. The more I've read these books, and that's why I want to get the larger one now, even though it's going to cost me a lot of money. The guy says around September 11th, which is the anniversary of Paul McCartney's death, he's going to do a special rate. He's going to try to do a special rate, and he'll post that on his Facebook page. So add him on, Thomas E. Harriet, Uharriet. I'll probably, when I buy that, if he does do it at the lower rate, because I asked him, I said, I bought 2 of your books, and I'm going to buy the third one, which I should have bought in the first place. I didn't want to spend, I think it was like 40 or 50 bucks, I forget. It's really expensive, so that's why I went and bought little segments of it. But I wouldn't have bought the second segment, I told him, if I knew it was less than half the amount of pages as the other one, and it includes chapters that are already covered in the other one, so it was kind of a waste of money. So the more I read, I'm getting more and more convinced this is actually a fact, that Paul McCartney did die September 11th, 2000. Sorry, not 2001. That was the false flag operation against the United States of America by the Bush cabal et al. Okay, that stole 2 elections, one after that and one before that. Okay, so some of the chapters I want to cover. One I think is very interesting is one chapter is about Apple, the company. And they say the reason they called it Apple is it's actually a play on words. It's A. Paul. And it was founded, of course, by the new Paul and by John Lennon. But the real creativity in the band, and why the band took off, is the new Paul. So he was saying they were calling it A. Paul because he's A. Paul. Not the one you think he is, but he is a Paul. Or he's playing a Paul because he's not really Paul. As I covered, he's Billy Shears or Billy Campbell or William Campbell. He goes under many different names. Okay, in one of the another very interesting chapter. Okay, so he says the old Paul McCartney used to part his hair on the left. The new Paul McCartney parts it on the right. I haven't really looked at all the pictures to confirm that. One of the other chapters is Donovan. Donovan was finally told about, because he was close to the original Paul, so he was told about the death of Paul McCartney, and he wrote the song. First there was a mountain, then there was no mountain, and then there was a mountain, I think it was, or I forget how it goes. But anyway, he had first said, well, first there was a Paul, then there was no Paul, then there was a Paul, and then he got the idea to write the song. And he couldn't actually say that in the song, so he said there was a mountain. Also, something in Mellow Yellow they talk about here is references to Paul's death, but I don't remember that now. One other chapter that I want to talk about is when Paul McCartney got arrested for marijuana in Japan. The reason he was held there for 9 or 10 days, I can't remember how long it was, is because the Japanese government was using fingerprints that were originally attained by the first Paul when he was busted in Germany, I think it was. And so they were asking this new Paul, how come you're Paul McCartney, but the Paul McCartney before, when he got arrested in Germany, had different fingerprints? So how can you explain that? And he couldn't explain that because he couldn't reveal the secret. So it was finally the British government and MI6 that had negotiated with the Japanese government to finally release him, because he couldn't release. They were actually probably afraid he was going to finally break under torture from the Japanese government to interrogation, which can be called torture, about his true identity, which would have caused a international controversy. Not only was it already an international controversy because this was 1970, I think 71 or 72 or something, and the fact that the Japanese government is arresting one of the singers of the Beatles because he has marijuana. Of course, he said he took a large amount of marijuana stupidly, and he just didn't even think about the consequences of that. He just I'm Paul McCartney, fuck it. He put it in a suitcase, and they said they had surveillance cameras of the guy who originally found the marijuana in the suitcase, and this security guard in the airport probably was a fan of Paul McCartney, and he didn't want to bust him, but he didn't know what to do. He was sitting there for the longest time looking at it I can't believe he has this in his suitcase. So he was at a total loss of what to do, and finally he had to report it. So anyways, that's one of the chapters that's very interesting. There's so many good chapters in this book, and there's a lot of good chapters in the Enlightenment book, but I can't remember now all of them. Okay, so the parts that they left out of these two books that are in the larger memoir, which I'm going to get, is parts talking about the Illuminati, and parts talking about secret governments, and parts talking about evil occult stuff that they were starting to dabble in a lot of their songs, and in their studies of things and their drug taking. So he kind of hints at it a little bit in the book Billy's Back, saying that the band was starting to be used for the destruction of the counterculture by the secret governments, by helping spread LSD throughout the hippie movement to kill the hippie movement. Because if they were taking normal non-lethal or non-toxic drugs, which are the ones from nature, which are allopathic medicine, or no, sorry, homeopathic medicine. Homeopathic medicine is anything you take straight from the earth, from the herb. If you smoke marijuana, that's natural. It's more natural to take it as an herbal supplement. Like you can make brownies with it. That's the most natural way. When you're smoking it, you're getting a little bit of toxic smoke. But anyways, it's not as deadly as tobacco toxicity from and all the other chemicals they put in tobacco. So the other natural herbal medicines or natural earth homeopathic medicines are mushrooms and cactuses, which I have a few up here in the window. I'm not going to show you now. I think I showed you in a few other videos. Because they're completely legal in all countries. It's San Pedro cactus, which was called San Pedro because in Peru, the Catholic government tried to ban the use of San Pedro, but they couldn't because it was so much part of the culture that they finally said the reason you're able to see visions of your dead relatives, because people would take it usually around All Saints Day time, which was not really All Saints Day in that country because they weren't Catholic yet. They were practicing their traditional beliefs that going from summer into winter, whatever that time would be, for some people it's November 1st, All Souls Day. In Japan it's Obon, and it's this month actually. It's this week in Japan. It's now the 13th of August. So in Japan they worship the dead relatives at this time. That's going from the hottest time of the year slowly back into the coldest time of the year, because we just had the last few days were the hottest of all the year, and then it goes slowly back to the cold. So they, in all cultures in history, that was considered the veil between the light and the dark somehow. That has to do with dead people and living people somehow being able to communicate between this veil. Anyway, going totally off subject of these books, I think that's a bunch of baloney, because there's no such thing as life and death. It's just two sides of the same coin that we always constantly live forever, and we go through waking and dying. I mean, we go through death and rebirth just like we go to sleep at night when we wake up. We just happen to shed our body, which is just it's a receiver. Some mystical traditions call it something you need to get rid of. You need to, not be controlled by your bodily sensations for sex and for intoxications and for food and for all the things you think, because that's greed and whatever. But actually, the body is a receiver. So if you leave your body, you're going to want another body again, because you can no longer receive all the beautiful sensations that a body can receive. So a body is a great thing. But it's, for a lot of people, it's a choice to go on to a new body because they feel they've done enough with the body that they're in. I happen to like my body, so I'm going to probably live in my body for hundreds of years. But if I decide, at 160 or 190, I'm going to need a new body, I'll probably do that too. But it is a choice. We're going way off, but some of that's covered a little bit, these ideas in Buddhist, in Beatles' Enlightenment, because they were studying Eastern philosophy, Buddhism and Hinduism and other things. But going back to the allopathic and homeopathic, also ayahuasca is a homeopathic medicine for opening up your vision to see things that normally you can't see but are actually there. And so is peyote and other cactuses, not only San Pedro, which I have in the window next to me over there. It's too hot even to look at the window. I got the curtains shut because it's too hot. So when a pharmacist takes the active ingredients out of a plant and tries to genetically modify it and tries to make it into a chemical drug, like speed, like LSD, like PCP, like all these things, we call it the toxic mimic. And if you're taking the toxic mimic, when you take a plant out of its communion with nature, that plant will take you out of communion. So all the communes and all the great things that the hippie movement was doing the LSD took them out of communion and it totally destroyed the movement. And that's what the even though I was named after Timothy Leary and my dad thinks he was a great guy, he was totally influenced by the government who was helping, the secret governments was helping to fund him to destroy the movement. He didn't probably even know that. But the Beatles started to realize that was going on. So yes, the LSD song Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, although he said on interviews that no, it was my son, Julian Lennon, who drew some picture and he said it was Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. He might have done that, but anyway, the song was about LSD, obviously, if you listen to the song. So there's no question about that. But to call it Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds gives it you don't go out there and say take LSD, and you can see plasticine porters with looking glass ties and the girl with the kaleidoscope eyes that'll take you away, and the newspaper taxis appearing on the shore and all the other stuff. It's about LSD, obviously. If you've ever taken any visionary drugs, I call them drugs if they're chemical. So LSD is a drug, PCP is a drug. Other chemical derivatives of the plant that's been fucked with by chemists in white coats is going to be toxic, and it's going to take you out of communion. But if you take the actual natural medicinal plant like marijuana, which could be hallucinogenic, it depends on how you take it. I find if you take it in a brownie or cook with it, it becomes a little more intense, the hallucinogenic properties of it, than if you were to partake in the consumption of it by inhalation. Of course, I don't do any of that stuff in Japan, because Japan is very, very illegal, because we're still in the backwater part of the world, where they think, if you free your mind, you might realize that you're being wholly controlled by NHK and the government, fake media, and the domineering one-party system that's in Japan, which is now in a coalition government with a party that I do at least somewhat support, although I can't really study much about it because there's not much really good in English available to study about it. I won't go into all the politics of Japan right now. We're going to these books. So in the Buddhist Enlightenment, they do briefly talk about that, and also in Billy Shear's back, but if you want more about that and the secret government and all the witchcraft and all the other stuff that they were starting to dabble in with, once they started taking LSD, it kind of pushed them into the toxic mimic of reality, which is, there's good and bad sorcery. Just like on the Wizard of Oz, there's good and bad witches. I use magic. I call it magic, and not only the reason I call it magic is because it's not yet understood by science, because science is a religion now. The religion of scientism is everything they think is somehow provable by physical observation, which is complete nonsense, because there's a threefold reality in Buddhism, and I think they cover a little bit of that threefold reality from what I remember, in Buddhist Enlightenment. I keep saying Buddhist Enlightenment, it's Beatles Enlightenment. But they're starting to go towards the idea of Buddhism. That's why it's becoming Enlightenment, because Buddha means enlightened one. So in Buddhism, there's the threefold reality, which is appearance, nature, and entity. So appearance is everything physical, and that's what science tries to prove anything by looking at one little of the threefold, one fold of reality, which is appearance. So you can observe, only thing you can observe is the appearance of reality. You can't observe the nature of reality. The nature of reality is everything you can't see, feel, touch, taste, or smell. So we know, if you're watching this video, I'm having thoughts. Yes, they can look in and see some kind of energetic movement in my brain and circuitries firing and stuff, but that isn't where my thoughts are. That isn't where my awareness is coming from. It's coming from right here in my I could say heart or thymus area, which is the seat of the soul. So in the thought or thinking in Chinese characters is a rice field with a heart underneath it. So true thought comes from your heart, and they only the what's the institute? Heart Math Institute is starting to really understand the heart and its ability to be, know, perceive, and receive information and awareness that is so beyond what this little monkey thing upstairs called the cognitive mind can do. But science mostly is controlled by the cognitive mind, so it's so far from the full view of reality that it's still, in my opinion, called a cult or a religion of scientism. But if you watch my interview, 2 hour or hour and a half interview on Gem Gen Radio, my second one, the guy who does the interview is probably the best person that's ever interviewed me on any radio station. And he actually goes into the cult of scientism, all their experiments that prove that the Eastern philosophy of Buddhism and other ancient traditions in their thinking was so much more advanced than our thinking now, because now finally the scientists are starting to catch up with their experiments. But anyway, it's still looking at 1/3 of reality. So what's the other third of reality? It's the entity of reality. So if you have everything that's appearance, everything you can see, taste, feel, touch, smell, whatever other senses you have, and then everything you can't, which is the nature of reality, which is you can only be, know, perceive, and receive it with your heart, and you put those together, they become a larger reality, which is the entity of reality. So anyway, it's covered a little bit in Buddha's Enlightenment, or Beatles' Enlightenment. I keep calling it Buddhist Enlightenment. These ideas, but it's very really briefly touched upon. I would prefer to read the whole book, and I'm gonna get that soon, after around September 11th, because that's when it's going to be on sale. So I'll wait until then to make another video. Let me just see if there's any other chapters I want to comment on. I've commented a lot in my people who have put messages in the other videos on a lot more of the information in this book and in the other book. So let's see if I can just... Oh, there's a lot of Masonic symbolism in a lot of the albums, so they did start covering a little bit of that in this book, Billy's Back, which I would read if you're gonna only read one of them, and you're gonna want to only spend $18. Don't spend $16 and get 75 pages of a lot of the stuff that's in this book, and a few other chapters that weren't. So let me see. Sunday Morning, Creeping Like a Nun. I forget. A lot of the songs after this were all talking about these days that they were in hiding. Band on the Run, the song that the new Paul McCartney released when he went solo, is talking a lot about those days from November that actual leaks got out in the media, and the actual time that he was killed. Or he died, sorry, he wasn't killed. Unless he was killed, which it doesn't yet go into. Maybe it goes into the larger book. He was in a car accident, but whether that was my hop or lie hop, let it happen on purpose or made it happen on purpose, who knows. I may go into that in the larger book, and I'll talk about that if it does. Even though he had visions of his death coming, that he wasn't sure exactly how it was going to come, I believe everyone, if they're in touch with ultimate reality, or reality in itself, can know the future, because the future is just a part of what's going on now. So there's no reason you shouldn't be able to know the future, even though it's all probabilities and possibilities, which probabilities is everything in the past that's happened. Possibilities is everything that could happen that has never happened before, like someone dying, because he's never died before, at least not in this life, not in that lifetime. So, Hey Jude. Although the song he said was written about Julian Lennon, and he kind of, in a way, did talk about that. It's also Hey Jude. The James, it says, Hey Jude is about me, the brother of James Paul. James Paul McCartney, fully letting him into my heart. It is about me forsaking my reluctance to be totally one with him. Okay, so Jude, I guess in the Bible, I'm not a Bible historian, so I'm probably going to be butchering this idea because I can't remember. I read this a while ago. I guess was a brother of James, and Paul McCartney's name is James Paul McCartney. So the song Eleanor Rigby originally was written by James Paul McCartney, and he had wrote it about his dreams of dying. So he said James Paul McCartney died in a church when was buried along with his name, because they knew if he died he would have to bury his name, because they couldn't tell anyone he died, because he already decided they were going to continue on with the Beatles if he did die. This is what James Paul McCartney decided. So he had talked to people in his family and his friends that he can be close enough to that would not rat on the whole thing, because the British government wanted Beatles to continue because it was the biggest sales for the empire of the UK, which really is no longer an empire but was trying to be an empire. And the US has pretty much made them a puppy dog, pulling them by the string in the Iraq War and other wars, which is pretty sad for the British government and for the British people. But anyway, so that's why he originally wrote the Hey Jude idea. That's what he says in this book. Although there is references that it could be about Julian Lennon, because he did care obviously a lot about Julian Lennon being abandoned by John Lennon. And when John Lennon met Yoko Ono, he pretty much just took off on his wife and his son, and pretty much didn't keep in contact with them as much as a normal father would do. It's funny, it's kind of ironic that John Lennon should be thought of as like this peace and loving hippie guy, when he was the most abusive to his first wife, and he was very abusive to the new Paul McCartney, verbally and fighting. Of course, they both fought together, but anyway, he was very, according to the new Paul McCartney, he was the antithesis of everything that people thought of him after writing the song "Love Is All You Need." But if you can think of the song that they co-wrote together, which was "It's Getting Better All the Time," Paul McCartney, or the new Paul McCartney, William Campbell wrote "It's Getting Better All the Time," and John Lennon said, "Yeah, it can't get much worse." He was always the pessimist in most of the songs. And also, the lyrics in that song, "Used to Be Me and I Beat My Woman," is pretty much your story of John getting this first one. I don't know if you did this.